it's not selfish to look after yourself. And actually, when you look after yourself, everyone else benefits around you.
I generally like to keep these conversations as raw and authentic as possible, which is why I don't have a list of questions. I don't really I like to think of it as if you and I happened to meet while we were at dinner or just walking by on the street and got the chance to speak, what would we want to talk about, right? And let the conversation flow organically, because I think that's when the best conversation comes out, when people are real, raw, and authentic, and we're not putting on a show for everybody, because you are an expert in a lot of things, right? So looking through your bio, you've got expertise in speaking and coaching and helping people with breathwork, and there's a tremendous amount of experience that you can bestow on people.
Yeah.
But I always like to get to the real version, right? So the behind the scenes and what created the drive and intensity to go after all of that. So I would love to start there if we could, and kind of give me a little bit of a background into how did you get started going down this path?
Oh, okay. That's a really good place to start.
Great. Let's do it.
So, my background is, like everyone's, probably pretty varied, and nobody in school ever said to me, that what I'm doing right now was a potential career choice or something that I could do. So I went to university and did psychology and really enjoyed that. And then wanted to go into play therapy, actually. But that was a really hard thing to get into when you're 21 and didn't have a kid. And just, people wouldn't have really taken that so seriously. I also bought my first house when I was 19. So I had bills to pay as well. Yeah. So I don't think there's many 19-year-olds that can do that now in the world we live in now, but it was easier then. So I just looked for a job, and the job that I got was in a call center, and I did some sort of finance exams and things like that. And I took the chance to go for a promotion into human resources. And I got that, and they sponsored me then to do my postgrad in human resource management, which I really loved, really enjoyed it. It was a really fast growing company, so I had a lot more responsibility than I probably should have had or would have had in a more established company. And everything was going pretty good, and I thought that was kind of my career plan mapped out. And I went for a lunch with the managing director the one day, who was in his 70s then and was all sorts of wrong, really. And he took me for lunch and he said, "Lianne, you've got a really bright future here. Just don't get pregnant." Which obviously you shouldn't say, but as fate would have it, I was actually pregnant at that lunch. So that really changed everything, as it would. And I knew that it wasn't the kind of organization that was going to be super supportive and give me a work-life balance. And once I was pregnant, all I really wanted was to be a mum. So I decided in my naivety that it would probably only be about a year and then I'd be able to go back to my career. And that doesn't happen. Children tend to need you for a little bit more than a year. And so I started to just do any job that I could that was very much home-based, that I could work around my daughter, and did all sorts of things, from making appointments for people to fundraising to selling candles to people, anything to put a bit of extra money on the table. And that eventually, as my daughter got a little bit older, I thought, okay, I want to go back into human resources. At that point in the world we lived in then, working at all from home as human resources was impossible. It was very much, you've got to be where the people are, and it was just not even a suggestion. And so that wasn't an option for me because I still needed a bit of flexibility. So I decided to retrain, and I retrained in accountancy and did that. Set up a bookkeeping and accountancy practice, and to the outside world, everything was pretty successful. Had flexibility, was earning fairly decent money, and to the outside world, I had sort of the trappings of success, I guess. And internally, I felt everything but that. I felt a fraud. I hated accountancy, hated numbers, just didn't enjoy it at all. And what I did enjoy was clients would come into me and spend a whole morning talking to me about the argument they'd had with their wife or the troubles they were having with their kids. And I was really good at helping them with that. Whereas an accountant, that's not really my job.
Right.
So I made a really big life choice and changed so many things about my life. And one part of that was walking away from the business that I'd created and deciding to retrain. And what I knew I'd always enjoyed was helping people and psychology. And so I went back to school basically and did lots of therapies, holistic therapies, talking therapies, and set up a therapy practice. And then on the back of that, I was invited to go places and give little talks. And then I was invited to go into organizations. And I went into one organization, delivered a sort of hour talk. And at the end of it, the guy said, I was really, really good. We want you to do more. Do you have other courses? And so I just kind of went, I didn't have anything. And I went home and created some workshops very quickly. He picked one and I created it and delivered it. And that really grew. And so that was probably, it was 2013. And so over the last 12 years, that's grown quite a lot. And the training company now, I deliver in about 45 countries and have a big catalogue of sort of well-being and personal development courses. I still do therapy for people as well. So I have a therapy practice, which I use online and in person in Cardiff in Wales. And yeah, just still really passionate about helping people, but definitely feel like that journey led me to finding what I was passionate about and who I was. And there was a whole lot of kind of self-searching and working out what lit me up, I guess.
Yeah. I think one of the things I'm hearing you say there is you spent a lot of time originally chasing the world's definition of success, and you had to kind of unlearn that and then relearn who you were, what you really enjoyed, and pursue the authentic success to you. And that's when you found really the fulfillment, right? That's when you found the joy, when it was closer aligned to who you really were.
Totally. What I always say to people is sort of, particularly through my 20s, I had sort of an invisible mental checklist of just kind of get the degree, get the job, get the house, get a bigger house, do all of those things. And I don't think that I had ever really stopped and thought, what do I want? It was more what I thought was expected of me. And so I found myself, as I know lots of people do, sort of living a life that from the outside it looked fine, but internally there was that total disconnect of this isn't me, this isn't what I want, this isn't what excites me or makes me passionate.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about the mom guilt and the mom struggle of that, because that's a whole, I mean, that's a whole podcast series, let alone a conversation, yeah. But trying to juggle being true to yourself, first and foremost, then being present for your family, being present for your husband, being present for your business. Like there's a lot of different things that are all wanting to be priority number one.
Yeah.
Right. So where do you start that process? And is that something that, over time you had to adjust to? Because I think a lot of people really start by putting themselves last on the list.
Definitely. And I think that to some degree is what you sign up to as being a parent, particularly in the early days, is if they need feeding, they need feeding. If they wake up at 3 a.m., they wake up at 3 a.m. and your needs go to the bottom of the pile. And then I think unless you check in on yourself, they just stay there. And for me, it was sort of learning the hard way of that. So I definitely, I reached burnout. So I got really quite poorly, made myself really ill. And when I say made myself ill, I definitely did it to myself. When I look back on it, no one was saying, you've got to be superwoman and you've got to do all these things. But that was my own narrative.
Right.
And so I'd got to a stage where the business had grown and I was still very much focusing on being a mum. I was focusing on being a wife, a good daughter and a good friend, all of these different hats that we wear. And during that time, I went through quite a lot of bereavements quite quickly. So I lost like 7 people quite close to me within a few years. And I carried on working through that and carried on, particularly when you're training and you're presenting, there's kind of a bit of a showman element to that, where you put on the smiley face and you're there to support and hold space for everyone else. And one of the last bereavements I had was my grandfather, who I was super close to. And I was delivering an online workshop and I paused for a break. I went into my kitchen, my husband was there, and he said, I'm afraid like your granddad has died. Gave me a hug and I said, okay, I can't deal with that right now. I've got to carry on training. And I went back and I delivered training on confidence. And nobody at all in that room would have thought badly of me if I'd said, I've just had some really bad news. I need to like cancel this. And I did that to myself. And that was kind of the stage I'd got to where I was so far down that list that you just talked about that my needs weren't really considered. I was constantly putting everyone else before. And so I got really chronically ill. So I developed some really bad stomach issues, which they thought was Crohn's or potentially even cancer at one point. And that was my slap, really, of just realizing, and also realizing that I had created that sort of narrative of having to be everything to everyone. Nobody expected that. The people who loved me just wanted the happy, healthy version of me. And I had cornered myself into that role. So there was a lot of unlearning in that process. I went on a really profound, and certainly for 2 years, my job for 2 years was predominantly healing myself. And everything else was almost secondary to that.
Yeah.
Which forced me to be really selfish as well. But we have this relationship with selfishness, don't we? We think selfishness is always spiteful and someone else has got to hurt because we're being selfish. That's what we're taught as kids. But selfishness can just be recognizing that right now my needs are really important. No one else has to hurt from that. And I kind of had to really teach myself that that was okay.
That's a really good point I never really thought about, is because you're right. When I hear the word selfish, the natural inclination is it's going to affect someone else negatively.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it has to be that way.
No.
Right now, I think to what you said before, when you are a little bit selfish, obviously not in a malicious way.
Yeah.
But when you are selfish and take care of yourself first, it allows you to show up better for everyone else around you.
Exactly that. And they get a better version of you because you're happier, you're calmer, you're just the better you.
Yeah, and I think that there's a big component of that we don't stop to think about is we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be everything to everybody, and everyone expects me to be this and that and this for them. But more often than not, they're not the ones saying that. Like, of course, they appreciate when you do something for them. Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
But when push comes to shove, they probably really just have just you, just the happy, healthy, present version of you. And I think that presence part is really hard. At least it was for me, because you tend to think about all the things that you have to do on your to-do list. You have all this stuff that you have to do, or at least you're telling yourself you have to do, right? So as a spouse, as a parent, as an entrepreneur, like there's a lot of stuff that you put pressure on yourself to do, and it really takes you out of being present in the moment. So maybe this is where breath work comes in, you tell me, but is that something that you would do to kind of reset and refocus yourself and kind of release that and physically be present in the moment?
Definitely. I think when I went on that healing journey, I started to explore all sorts of alternative ways of getting better. I just couldn't accept that this was how I was always going to be. And that involved all sorts of things. I worked with a herbalist, I did acupuncture, I did like more yoga, and one of the things I'd already been dabbling in, but I decided to really step up in that period of time, was the breathwork stuff. So I actually came to breathwork about 2019, and I found it really interesting. And as a therapist, you use the breath quite often to help people regulate their nervous system anyway. But I started reading about it, came across an amazing book by James Nestor called Breath, which just kind of blew my mind as to how powerful it was and how much every single function in your body is impacted by your breath, which makes sense, but it's something we take for granted as well. Right. And so I came back to that a lot when I was poorly. And I think when COVID hit as well, I started to really look into that a lot more as well. And did training with Wim Hof and Patrick McCowan and a guy in the States called Ed Harold, and looked at it from lots of different angles. And so part of my recovery was doing breath work on the mat, but actually realizing with exercise, with breath work, with therapy, doing that even for an hour a day doesn't have much of an impact if the 23 hours are spent really unhealthy.
Right.
And so for me, it was absolutely hitting the mat and doing, some kind of really deep, trippy, holotropic breath work that could really help release a lot of trauma and stress and things like that. But actually, it's how do I breathe throughout the day, and coming back and using that as a form of presence. And I love that you use that word, because it's such a powerful thing for us to do. And if we're not aware of it, everything is trying to get our attention all the time. And so the most simple way I started to connect to my breath is I use a lot of algorithms in therapy with clients. So if X happens, then Y happens. So for example, if my boss is stressing me out, then I go for a walk before I reply, right? So just the brain works on these really basic algorithms. And so with breath, I started, if my phone beeps, then I pause and take a deep, deliberate breath. It's as simple as can be, but the amount of time your phone beeps, and then it extends to your laptop beeping, and then actually extends to being in the supermarket and someone else's phone beeping. It was a great way of me anchoring to connect with my breath constantly throughout the day. So I was dealing with those 23 hours and not just that 1 hour.
Yeah. I'm thinking too, we talked a little bit about being selfish, and it's really interesting. Maybe I'm connecting the dots a little bit too intentionally here, but we don't think generally about breathing. Breathing is something we just do, right? We don't often think, I have to breathe, right? That thought doesn't cross your mind every 3 seconds.
Exactly.
But you're doing it.
Yeah.
And I think if you are intentional about that thought, right, there is literally nothing more selfish than breathing air for you to survive. So if you're a little bit selfish here and think, I need to breathe properly so that I can function, live. Hey, let's start with the basics. Let me be alive so that I can be present and be of service to myself and the people around me. Right? I think that's a really great maybe place to start, is understanding, hey, you physically need to take care of yourself. If you are not here, you're of no use to anybody. Right? So start with the very basics. Take care of yourself. Give yourself that 3 seconds of breath, that intentional deep breath, and then repeat it 30 times a day at minimum.
Definitely. And I think one of the first things I learned, and I can't remember which teacher told me it, and I feel really awful not giving them credit, but one of the first things I learned was the rhythm of your life is reflected by the rhythm of your breath. And so someone who's stressed and anxious will gasp, they'll hold their breath, so they have a bit of apnea for a while, then they'll go into rapid breathing. So it's like stop, start, really, I call it jagged. So sometimes we can feel that our breath is really jagged and just all over the place, really jumpy. And so recognizing that if my breath does that, then my nervous system feels that. And ultimately, my mind gets signals that I'm not feeling safe, that there's potentially threats. And so I start producing stress hormones, and all sorts of physiological triggers happen in my body. So if I can just create a smooth rhythm in my breath, then the way I've always interpreted that is if my breath is smooth, so I'm just breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, my brain can start to have a very similar pattern. My nervous system can have a similar pattern. And so just by controlling the breath, you start to control things which feel incredibly out of your control and too big to face sometimes. And so when I'm using it in therapy with clients, sometimes, you know, with best intentions, people will tell people to have positive thoughts, or, you know, kind of that toxic positivity, right? Just say a positive affirmation and everything will be okay. If you're in a really dark space, it's not going to do anything at all. So sometimes thinking our way out of a problem that's created by the brain is really not helpful. And I think stepping into the body and dealing with the physiology rather than the psychology, one, feels way more manageable when my brain feels cluttered. And two, is way more impactful, because if I'm telling my body to just slow down and feel calmer, my brain has to follow. My brain can't stay anxious if my body's calming. But if I'm trying to calm my body down by thinking different thoughts, it's really hard to stay focused on that.
Yeah, and you can sort of use some of those algorithms to retrain yourself in different scenarios where, let's say for the first 30 years of your life, you happen to get very nervous or anxious when this scenario happens.
Yeah.
You can retrain yourself now through some very intentional breath work and a lot of repetition to when this happens now, you know, that algorithm changed where you can then calm yourself and approach a situation totally differently. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. So in really basic terms, when we inhale, we're hitting the sympathetic nervous system, right? Which is, I describe that as our accelerator, as the gas. When we exhale, we're hitting the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the brakes. So to be a good driver in anything, if I've just got my foot on the brake, then I'm going to crash or burn out, or I'm not going anywhere. And if I've just got my foot on the gas, I'm going to crash or I'm going to burn out. So what we need to do as we drive through life is accelerate, brake, and we get that nice rhythm. And that sort of encourages us to work with the rhythm of our life rather than us trying to control everything.
Right.
So I think using the breath in that way is such a powerful thing for any of us to do.
Yeah, and I would think much like driving, you don't want to be stomping on the gas or the brake. You want to use like slow, controlled movements. So I guess to relate that back, the people who spend a lot of their time heavy breathing and exhaling and in that like stressful breath, they're going to start to feel a lot more stressed, right? So it's the chicken or the egg, which one comes first? Are you stressed and that's why you're breathing heavy, or are you breathing heavy and that's why you're stressed? Or are they just making each other worse?
Exactly. And like you said, so many of us have kind of learned things through childhood and our life experiences. We're not even necessarily aware that we're breathing dysfunctionally. So we might look like we're sat relaxed watching TV. But if I'm sat relaxed watching TV, but I'm mouth breathing or I'm breathing through my upper chest, my brain is not relaxing. My brain gets a signal that there's a potential threat. Our breathing is the first thing that tells the brain whether the environment is safe or dangerous. And we might consciously know that we're safe and it's all good, but because we've learned that unhealthy pattern, we've gone into stress so many times, we forgot to come out of it, then eventually the brain just stays on high alert. Right. I deal a lot with anxious clients. I've never had an anxious client that has fully functional breathing. And I'm not saying that breathing effectively will completely eradicate anxiety, because there's lots of other factors. But if you can teach yourself to breathe functionally and come back to the breath, it will absolutely improve your experience of anxiety.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. Now, I want to go back to clients and therapy. and you as sort of in that relationship, when you are sitting in that room having the conversation, there is sort of this expectation that I think a lot of people have that you are this magical robot that has no feelings and you can say a couple magic words, make them feel better, and you do not receive any of that. Mm-hmm. Right? So obviously that's not true. And there is a lot that you then have to receive and process and get rid of to then, live your day in a positive way. And I think that, first of all, more people need to understand that. Right? You are just as needing of conversation and, I think that there's a lot of therapists that have therapists. Most of them that I know have their own. And there's a good reason for that. But I think it ties really nicely back into the selfish part. If you do not take the time to take care of yourself, you cannot be effective for those people that you see as clients.
Yeah.
Right? Because you would be of no use to them. You'd wind up making them worse instead of better because you are not being selfish with your own self-care to come in there even and calm and prepared. If you come in there a hot mess, you're helping nobody.
Totally.
And I think that's hopefully a clearer picture for people to understand how they act in their normal everyday life. You may not be a therapist. You may be, just whatever your profession is. But we somehow don't think that it's also necessary when you come into the office and you're going to be holding a meeting, that if you come in there calm, that you've handled everything you had to handle because you took care of yourself first, you're going to show up way better, right?
That's definitely something that I learned early on in therapy, really, is I think nearly every therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist I know will have the same sort of story that generally growing up as a kid, they were the person that other people came to, and that's been their kind of thing their entire life. Like my entire life, I'm the youngest in my family, but everyone came to me with their problems. Friends have always come to me. I could sit on a bus and someone could sit next to me and they'll just start telling me stuff. And up until doing lots of my therapy training, I felt all of that. So I remember someone telling me that their dog had to be put to sleep. And I cried and she comforted me. Like I was so empathetic that I absorbed it all. Now, as a therapist, that would be a really, really bad trait, because if you come to me and you tell me something awful and then I sit there and cry or make it about me, you're not getting much from it. Right. So there's lots and lots of things that you put in place in order to do that. So the starting point for me is always physical boundaries. So this is actually my face-to-face therapy room. My chairs are a good 2 meters apart from each other. So I don't sit close to my client. And just that physical distance gives me the ability to have distance and perspective. Sometimes clients do tell me things that will absolutely get me. They might be things that are very close to home that I can relate to, experiences I've gone through, or just heartbreaking stories. But you have to remind yourself that I'm here to help. And so my stuff has to go to the side.
Yeah. But
so
let's hold there for a second.
Yeah.
Because you still then need to, right, in that moment, you have to be present for them and you have to help them through that, right? That's what you signed up for.
Yep.
After that, you still need to process that, right? So you still need to then go talk to somebody else or whatever your process is for processing that. You can't just put it in a box and forget it exists, right? So you have to go through that emotion separately. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So I have kind of, I guess, 4 points of doing that. So the first point is I write everything up. So that act of writing, self-reflecting, I'll often kind of sit, meditate, pray, just really be in a space. So I never have one client coming in and another client going out at the same time. There's always 15 to 30 minutes in between for me to be able to do that. So I can be fully present. I'm not bringing residual stuff in. So I have sort of my quiet and reflection time, which is really important. My husband is in the business as well. So we're both therapists. We both do a lot of breath work, things like that. And so I have him as a point of support. I then have a psychologist who is a great friend, and we basically do reciprocal sessions with each other. And then I have someone who is completely out of my circle, has no awareness of any of my personal stuff, who is a psychologist that I go to and just kind of have as someone who does a bit of supervision and a space, really, for me to be able to process that stuff. It's really important. And I have heard horror stories from clients. One client came to me whose wife had died very suddenly, very young, and he'd seen someone before me. And when he told that therapist started crying and he comforted her. So you really need a therapist that has dealt with their stuff, right?
Yeah, because I think that those are the people who give therapy sort of a bad rap, right? Because that person would have tried therapy, had a terrible experience, and said, nah, therapy's not for me.
Exactly that.
And I believe, big advocate for everybody needs therapy to some degree, right? Yeah. And it's not, you are not broken, you are not mentally ill. It is a person to talk to, right? Yeah. I want to draw a parallel here. You said earlier, people bring you their problems, right? That is essentially sort of what you signed up for there. But let's draw a parallel here to the CEO, the parent. What generally happens as a parent? You are now solving your kids' problems, right? Mommy, I need this. Mommy, I pooped my pants. Mommy, something happened at school, right? There's always something that they're bringing their problems to you. And if you do not have that same level of process for handling those problems, venting them out, solving them in some way, shape, or form, you explode. Yeah. Same way in the office, right? You're the CEO. All the problems of the company end up on your desk. For some reason, people don't make this connection. And to be honest with you, I didn't really think about it until we're having this conversation right now. But people tend to bring all of their worst problems to the therapist, say, hey, solve these for me. And then your responsibility is to help them walk through it. And then you yourself have to cleanse your palate to say, hey, how can I cleanse all of those emotions and things from my plate so that I can be the best version of me so I can serve the people around me? Yeah. And yet we do not take that same intentional effort as parents, as leaders, to do the same thing. We think somehow we're immune from it. Yeah. So I think that's really good encouragement for anyone who is either a parent, any level of leader, literally anybody ever, to start looking into how do you take the best possible care of yourself so that you could be there for other people. Do you see that same similarity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things you're really aware of in therapy is that residual stuff, that you kind of, I can't have you come and tell me about a bereavement and then the next person tell me about a divorce and not have a break between it all because it's going to carry through. But if you look at how we deal with our personal lives, we have that residual stuff all the time. Just the whole way that our mobile phones work. I could be having an intense conversation with my husband about something. The phone rings, my mother needs me. And then it's kind of just carrying that stuff through. And I suppose in a lot of ways in our personal life, we don't always have the luxury of having a processing space, but sometimes we do. I think another thing that I'd like to come back to that is a big distinction is sometimes, particularly as a parent, but sometimes in our relationships, if a friend, a sibling, whoever comes to you and says, I'm really struggling with X, then a lot of us go into fixing mode. So we desperately go into how can I solve this for them, particularly for our kids, because we don't want them to struggle with anything. We just want to fix it and make it better and them live in this wonderful, fluffy world, right? As a therapist, the first thing is that you never fix anything. And I'll have clients sit there and say, tell me what to do. And I say, well, that's not my job. I can absolutely explore possibilities. I can be a sounding board. I can teach you some neuroscience or some behavioral science that kind of backs up certain strategies. But I can't tell you what to do because only you have all of the knowledge and experience to know what's right for you. And that is a really fundamental part to being a good therapist. Again, you kind of hear stories where a therapist has perhaps overstepped the mark and has said, I think you should go and do this. You don't ever do that as a good therapist. And if your therapist is telling you what to do, I would really question that relationship. But in our personal relationships, we often think, okay, they're bringing me a problem. They want me to fix it. So now I have to tell them what to do. I have to make it better. In therapy, there's never that intention to do that. And I think that takes some pressure off in a way. It's more explorative. There's the emotion I bring to all therapy sessions is curiosity. Okay, so what would happen if you did do that? Why do you think that person pushed your buttons so much? Why do you think you said that? Curiosity engages creativity, which helps bring about solutions. In our personal life, we don't always do that. We feel we know the person inside out. We know what they were thinking. We know what they meant, even if they didn't say it. And so we jump in with a solution, probably sometimes, often making it worse, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a very real thing that I learned, especially with my wife, because I spend a lot of my day and have for darn near 30 years helping people solve problems, right? People come to you and they expect you to solve the problem. You're expected to hear the problem, give them a solution, and then you just go on with your day.
Yeah.
And when you bring that same attitude home, right, a lot of times my wife doesn't need me to give her a solution. She just wants to be heard. She wants to talk it out.
Yeah.
So for me to go then and say, like, not listen to you at all, but just give you the solution that I already decided 3 seconds into your story makes it so incredibly worse.
Yeah.
But that was the thing that I had to learn. And it really helps.
Dare I say that it is also more of a male thing to feel that you want to solve it a little bit more? Yes. I mean, I remember a client saying to me, I just don't get my wife. She comes home from work, she starts moaning. I suggest what she should do, and then she has a go at me. We end up having an argument. Why is she doing that? She doesn't want that.
Why are you doing that? That's the other question.
Exactly.
Have you not learned? Right? It's not working out. So on that same note, I'm genuinely interested to know, how do you manage this relationship with your husband? Because that to me is so incredibly complicated on so many levels. First of all, to work together. Mm-hmm. Second of all, to then have someone who understands the therapy part, but also, like, let's be real, you still have to live with each other and you still have to have real life. Yep. So there's going to be some times where I feel like it must get muddy at some point to juggle, are you therapying me or are you husbanding me? Like, which one is it?
So Tom's been in the business since 2019, so coming up 6 years. And he was originally in construction and project management. And my business beam was growing quite a lot. I needed someone to help me manage the business more that I trusted. His contract was coming to an end and we were deciding what he should do. And then one night we just thought, hang on a minute. Essentially, I need a project manager and you're really good at project managing. And when we made that decision, before he'd even decided for certain, we said there had to be some ground rules. And so I think my background in accountancy, I don't think anything's ever wasted. And I said I've got kind of, a bit of a meandering path that's led me here, but every bit is useful. My background in accountancy taught me that nearly any client I ever had that treated their business as their baby, which is so commonly used, ended up in trouble with their business. So my business is a business. I can exist separate from it. It's not my identity. I love it. I'm passionate about it, but it isn't my baby. And so that was kind of the first ground rule, I guess, is that this is an entity that we're both going to work towards, but it doesn't become a third person in our marriage.
Right.
We then have boundaries on time. So we're still to this day really strict. Unless it's an emergency, we do not talk about work outside of work hours. And if one of us forgets and goes, oh, did you send that email? Did you catch up with that person? The other one just says, no, Saturday, I'm not doing it. And so occasionally there'll be times where I will or he will email each other so we can remember something to talk about during work hours. We both also have our very kind of unique roles in the business. And so even though I had run the business for, was it 6-7 years before he came in, I was totally fine about giving him responsibility for his bits. So I was never looking over his shoulder or checking up or saying, you should have done it this way, you should have done it that way. I was really happy to give him the freedom to carve out his role. And then I think we really prioritize our marriage. So our marriage is sacred. We pray together every morning. We go for a walk together every day. We have really sacred routines within our marriage that means that it's God, our marriage business. Like it's down there somewhere, you know? So we don't feel that it runs away from us. And nobody ever believes this, but in the 6 years of him being in the business, we've argued about lots of things. We've never argued about work, ever. It's just not been an issue. And what I do love about working in a business together is it used to be, these are my career goals, these are your career goals, and I'll be your cheerleader and encourage you. But I couldn't help him in his construction career other than supporting from the sidelines. Now we have the same goals in our career, and it feels like that just made them so much more real, more powerful, rather than my goals just being in my head and me talking them through, but him only having a certain level of understanding without actually being in the business.
Right.
All of a sudden it became twice as vivid because both of us can see those goals and both of us know what we're working towards. And when we both do that and we both succeed, everything else in our life improves.
Yeah. Would you say that there's a proponent of that has to do with both of you having your own understanding of your authentic self first? So your identity is not the business or something else, but you know who you are individually. So you're not seeking identity from anything else?
Yeah. I think it's really hard to do the work that we do without doing a lot of work on yourself. You have to in order to progress and to be of service to other people. And so, yes, we have quite a strong understanding of who we both are, what we bring to the table, what we lack, what we need support in, what we're really happy for the one person to go forward with and the other one stay in the background. And that's definitely years and years and years of us talking, growing, supporting each other. I'm blessed to be in a marriage where we have grown together rather than growing separately and growing apart.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, this has been an incredible conversation, and I'm very honored that you spent the time with us today because I personally learned a lot, and I know that the people who are listening to this did as well. So I just want to honor you for doing what you do and for chasing your passion and not letting life take you in the direction that life wanted to take you, right? Not settling for average and just staying in accounting for the rest of your life just because it's what the world wanted you to be successful in, but chasing what you believed you were called to do because it makes a difference. And just, again, want to honor you for that. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been so lovely to talk to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank
any
you.
last words of advice you can give someone to kind of level up their day today? A little bit of encouragement.
What about a quick little breathing tip?
Let's do it.
Okay, so the easiest breathing exercise that will absolutely change your physiology really quickly is called the Physiological Sigh. And it's you breathe in twice through the nose and then slow exhale through the nose, right? So we'll do it together.
Sure.
So you breathe in through the nose, and then slow exhale through the nose. Do it again. One more. So that exercise taps into the parasympathetic nervous system, the relaxation response. If you watch your dog or your cat settling down to go to sleep, they'll circle up and then they go, and they do this great big physiological sigh. So it's just, you can do it anywhere, don't need your eyes closed, maximum of 5 times, and every time it will cause you to feel more relaxed.
I love that. And we can certainly level up a little bit of what we talked about before with the algorithms to then start training yourself. Hey, if you're in a situation where you usually feel stressed, now you start to intentionally do this, you can start to approach these situations in a totally different mindset.
Exactly that. Yeah. If I feel stressed, then I do the physiological sigh. So easy.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you again. This has been a tremendous honor. So
Pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
How can we support you going forward? Anywhere that we can do that?
Absolutely. So you can visit my socials, my website. I can give you all the details for that. www.beamtraining.co.uk for any companies, or beamtherapy.co.uk for anyone looking for therapy, because I do work online as well. So
excellent. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jim.
Hey, before you go, can I pray for you? Heavenly Father, thank you for this moment and for the person listening right now. I pray that this message reaches exactly who needs it. Open their eyes to see your truth and their ears to hear your voice clearly. Lord, I ask that you silence every doubt and every fear holding them back. Remind them that they are fearfully and wonderfully made, created with purpose and intention. Help them to step boldly into the calling you have placed in their life. Surround them with your peace, guide them with your wisdom, and strengthen them with your love. In Jesus' name, amen. I love you.